Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3, on top of page 1321. In general, there are two types of sweetening of the severities, two levels in a way, what we call two efanim or two minim. Those are the words he used. Two efanim would be like two methods or two manners, and minim, two types of sweetening, but you can also say it's two levels. And one is where the chesed, in both cases, the chesed is dominating over the gvura, means the kindness or the love, the the light is dominating over the darkness, over the severity, over the judgments of gvura, the concealment of gvura. The question is whether it is affecting it only in the sense its expression, like he said, it's his pashtus, or also is it somewhat also changing its fundamental personality? Both are happening through chesed, and that's the two types. We're in the middle of, after explaining the two types, just to give you the lay of the land, since we're already deep into this, it began on page 1315, and now we're on page 1321. So 1315, he began with the sweetening of the water, which was called Vayova Maroso, Vayimtu Kamayim, the chapter in B'Shalach, the bitter and sweet waters in the Torah itself. So this is really a discussion that's also grounded in verses of when the Jews left Egypt and they came to Mara, which is one of the reasons, the May Mara, the bitter waters, as they were sweetened. And there he says clearly that the waters were sweetened to the deepest level, that the bitterness itself became sweet. But then in explaining it, he began on page 1316, talking about the two methods, the two efanim. In Yadua, the top of page 1316, if you want to follow the order, sheyesh beis efanim b'amtokas hagvura. Ha'echad hu shagvurim tokim b'chsadim, that the gvuras are sweetened by chesed. But what he means here, as we'll understand a little later, is that chesed dominates as more sweet water than there is bitter water, to the point that it nullifies it. And that itself, of course, has levels within it. Omnam Eifana Beis, at the bottom of 1317, he begins b'amtokas hagvura shagvura atzmam nintakim, that the gvuras themselves are also impacted and they become sweet. That's its transformation. But then he makes it very clear when he asks the question on top of 1318, isn't it a yesod, kol ateda nivna yesod, of that the gvura is sweetened by the chesed? So what does it mean that the gvura itself is transformed? So he explains that in the second manner, the second type, is also through chesed. However, the chesed has impacted the very personality of gvura, where in the first type, it did not. As he explained on page 1318. I'm giving you just the structure because, as I said, it's been quite a few pages. Then, in the second paragraph on 1318, the Rebbe Rashab summed it up, but in summing it up, which he's doing now, he begins to add more details in both levels. So right now, we're in more details in the first level, or the first type of sweetening. So he says, "V'nimsa sheyesh beis minim sheyesh shnei minim hamtaka." This is 1318, and he first talks about the first one. Of course, he also talks about navoida, and then in paragraph 1319, going to 1320, he says both of these are through chesed, and that's when he introduces the concept. Well, before I say that, let me go back. On page 1318, 1319, he introduces neisei oven and kavish oven, the two levels, and he compares it to these two levels. One is conquers the sin, but does not erase it. And the second actually erases it completely. What means completely? We learn later, completely doesn't mean completely. It means doesn't have any impact and there's no punishment at all. That's the second level. That's on 1318, 13. I should mention that Naveda, this is all about the Nefesh Elokis's impact on the animal soul. So on page, it's going to be relevant to what we discussed, what we'll be learning today. That's why I want to mention it. On page 1316, 1317, when he explained the Aveda, he spoke about actually three levels. There's the Beinani, where there's a complete war going on between Nefesh Elikis and Nefesh Habamis, but the Nefesh Elikis dominates, like Chesed dominates over Gvura, but only in Machshava, Dibra, Ma'aseh, the thought, speech, and action. So essentially, that would be like the first level of sweetening, that there's more sweet waters than there is bitter, and it's nullifying it. In the second, the Tzaddik She'ena Gomer. There, this Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh Habamis has already been eliminated. But you can't say it's been completely transformed. Because there's still something that remains. The Ra is Kofuf. Batel B'Shishim, Batel B'Meya, Batel B'Elef, as he said on that page. We're talking about on the page. And he gave the example of the battle that he gives in a bit, that you sometimes, you allow the enemy, you allow yourself to be exposed to the enemy in order to destroy the enemy. That's the Tzaddik She'ena Gomer. And the Tzaddik Gomer completely doesn't have not anything negative at all. Everything's been transformed. And we're going to learn about this shortly inside. And that's what he spoke about. And he said clearly that is the level of transformation. Yeah, on page 1317. Okay, now, on page 1321, I'm sorry, on page 1319, in the paragraph, the Rebbe Rashab now introduces the concept of what level of chesed are we talking about? What is causing chesed to dominate over gvura, to put it in different words? So he said, clearly it's coming from chesed, which is a higher power. Like he said, that you have to have a power that allows the stone to be turned into a pool of water. And then he says, like, Hashem, which is Shema Vaisha Be'erin Sof Atmos HaMaitzel. So clearly it's coming from a higher level. In other words, it's not coming from the same level. The Chesed and Gvura, as he explains right after that, are commensurate to each other. So what gives Chesed more strength? So it's drawing from what we call Rav Chesed of, and that itself, you can have two ways. It could be it could be accessing it and giving it a little more strength, but really what drives primarily is Chesed of Zah. So Chesed is stronger than Gvura, but you cannot say that it completely sweetens it. Then it can also draw from Arichampin Rav Chesed, like he explained on page 1320, in a form of Maivir. It's just passing through, which means you have the dominant element is Chesed of Arichampin, which is a Chesed of Bligvul, and that is called Kulech Sodim, and that sweetens the Gevura completely. Not transforms it, but sweetens it completely, not partially. As we learned yesterday on page 1320. So the first one would be called, let me just see something. Yeah. But it doesn't completely transform it, and he brings the proof back from Kavish, because Kavish, as we learned before, does not erase it completely. Let me just check one thing. I just wanted to see which one is this. 1 second. Yeah. And what does it mean that it doesn't have any impact, the Midas Adin, even though it's not transformed? So in the parentheses, he explained that it's not like a majority, that the majority rules, Achir Rabam Lahatis. Where there, your din is absolutely din. However, it's outnumbered and therefore overridden by the majority. Then you have a situation when Rav Chesed comes, in a way, there's no din at all. That means there is no third opinion that is against. Or, Yeshlemer, Hiskam Yeshlemer, that the Midas Adin actually agrees to the Chesed and Rachamim. But agreement does not mean transformation. It just means it's completely an agreement right now, as we learned. Okay. And the reason for this is because even the level of Maivir, even when Rav Chesed of Atik is coming straight into Chesed of Zah without any dilution, it's still Shedish on Etzalim. Arich Hampin still has, even though he said Chesed and Gvura commensurate to each other, but Arich Hampin is commensurate to the general structure of the spheres. Not quite the same way. That's why Chesed is more powerful than Gvura. But to say that it's completely from a different realm, you also can't say. Like we explained at length. It's Shedish on Etzalim, so it has a Shaykhis, and that's why its effect is that it completely can nullify it, but it can't fully transform it, which is going to be the second level of sweetening, which we're going to learn about in the next paragraph on 1321. We're not there yet. But now he's spelling it out in Aveda, back to the Aveda of the Nefesh Elikis and Nefesh Abamis. So before we continue reading, let me just sum up what we said yesterday and just give a little introduction to refresh our memories, and then we'll continue reading on. So he says, in Aveda, he's going to describe two levels of Ava, and then he's going to bring a third level of Ava. You'll soon see why it's so relevant. Avas Elam, Ahava Rabba, and then at the end of the paragraph, which we didn't learn yet, is going to be Ahava B'Taanugim. Now, Avas Elam is Ahava Pitam V'das. This is something that can be explained to the animal soul. It's something we can internalize, we can understand. You don't have to be someone that's necessarily purely connected to a transcendent level to relate to it. It's something that is also has self-interest involved, because it's that God is good for you. Just when a person appreciates food, they appreciate the one who's giving them the food. So that's Avas Elam, Al Pitam V'das. So he says like this, that even though that is the primary force that refines the animal soul, precisely because it speaks to the animal soul on its terms, it also does not have the power to change its very personality. And it's very muhus, the muhus hativis tivim, the nefesh habamis. And he says because the aved b'chinusei pnimi, and therefore it's internalized in the heart, that the heart can contain it, and on the contrary, it actually quenches the thirst and the longing, and therefore and that's why it does not transform the personality, the composition, the mix, the chemical structure of the animal soul, of the blood and the flesh, natural flesh. Ahava Rabba, on the other hand, is Ahava Shalamayla Mitam V'das. So it's higher than our containers. So on one hand, it's not quite internalized, but it's like standing in awe of something. When you're in awe of something, it's the exact opposite of internalization. You're completely losing yourself and being absorbed in that which is greater than you are. So on one hand, it's not as personal, but on the other hand, it has the power to transform. So it's Lamaila Magbol Klealev, Ein Alev Yichel Lizbil Sa'ava, like he's brought from the Zehar, the tension that it creates. It's a love that is creating a tension because you're longing for something and your thirst is not being quenched. It's actually like a frustrating almost element, but frustration in a good way. He says that causes him to go Yetzim Megeder Hagbalasa. That tension, that very discomfort, causes you to go outside of yourself. And therefore, also the very personality of the natural personality of the heart and its emotions and inclinations are changed, and they go out of their comfort zone. They go out of their regular structure because they're being lifted up by this higher Ahava Rabba. And yet, I'm reading on the second line on page 1321. So though I read it, I'm reading it slowly again. So now we've definitely created an impact. I'm sorry, not just an impact, that's the first level. We've actually changed something in the personality, but to say you've transformed the personality completely, actually I stopped by a Makal Mokim. I'm sorry. I stopped by a Makal Mokim. So I'm going to read that, but I'm going to stop a moment. Let me explain before I read on. I remember I stopped before Makal Mokim. So what do we have now? Two levels. One is an impact on the animal soul. That's the first level, even of Avas Elam. Why? Because before Avos Elam, the animal soul was doing whatever it wants. The Avos Elam, al kaponim, at least, it somewhat tames the animal soul and directs it to having some connection to godliness. But it's not a transfer, it's an impact, not a change. Shinui means that something changes in the very personality, and that you need to have something greater than just explaining it alpi, the ava that comes based on a logical, a love that comes based on a rational argument or a rational contemplation. So we have these two levels now. The first level clearly is like what he said before. It's like the majority rules. It's not, there is din, because the animal soul still exists. However, it's been subdued, and it's more than that. It's even been convinced, but it's not necessarily any change in the din itself. Whereas the second level has created a change. So I'm thinking it's probably close to those two levels. One is Gabrus HaKayach HaChesed, and one is that it's like Arich Ampin. That's probably the two levels. The Arich Ampin that completely affects it, but it does not transform it. That's what he's going to say now. And then it's going to come transformation. But it's all happening through chesed. Remember, we're not talking about the third level. That's going to come later on 1325. So now he's going to go to the other side of things. That even when it has this effect, that it actually changes, it's still not a total transformation. Umekol mokim, so I'm reading on line 2, page 1321. Umekol mokim ein zeh shenepach muhusid legamri. Even when it's more than just impact and there's some change, it does not mean that the whole personality changed. And what would be a sign that it completely changed? Lias moyas bara. That he would despise anything that's negative. In this level that we're talking about, Ahava Rabba, you definitely have impact, and you've elevated, the animal soul has gone through a change. But to say that it no longer has any inclination and being drawn to anything negative, you can't say that. You can't say the person will never succumb again to the Nefesh Habamis. You could say right now, the Ahava Rabba is impacting, like we learned earlier, but it could be temporary. So to say that Nepach Muslagami to the point, Moyas Bara, which is the expression used in chapter 10 in Tanya on Tzaddik Gomer, we're going to learn about that momentarily, which means Shara Nepach Latev Lagamri, means Shara Nepach Latev Gomer, that the Ra completely was changed to good and there's no more Ra, period. That's not this level. Shazeh Madreges Tzaddik Gomer Ba'aveda, the Ahava B'Taanugim. This complete transformation is the Aveda of a Tzaddik Gomer, meaning the highest level of a Tzaddik, through the Aveda that he has Ahava B'Taanugim. This is the third level of Ahava. Ahava B'Taanugim, if you remember, is the Ahava from delights or pleasures. That's even higher than Ahava Rabba. Shalamayim Madreges Ahava Azer Kerish Be'esh, which is higher than the powerful love that burns like fiery flames. Like he says, like he says in Tanya chapter 9, the chapter before chapter 10. So here we have three levels right now. You have the first level, which he called the Avos Elam, you have Ahava Rabba, you have Ahava B'Taanugim of the Tzaddik Gomer. But now, just to make it clear, the Rebbe Rashab is going to spell all three out. He's going to spell them out in detail as they relate to what we're discussing, which is obviously going to help us understand better the three levels. Now, it's not really three levels because in general he's been speaking about two levels of sweetening, but in the first level there's clearly two steps or two stages or two levels. The level one, that there's more chesed than gvura, but it's not that there's no gvura. There is a din, just like in the majority rules. There is one opinion that holds the guilty gvura. The second is that the sweetness is completely dominant, and there's no sense of, and there's no effect, and of the gvura at all. But it's still not been changed, and it can come back, like he said. The sin has not been erased, and then there's the level where you actually transform, but it's not a total transformation. I'm sorry, that's the second level. My mistake. Second level is there's a change, but it's not total transformation. And then the third is that the gvura has been changed, the ra has been changed to teiv. The nefesh halikis, however, has done it, so it's still coming from chesed, but it's a transformation. Now, this brings us back to what I mentioned before, to page 1316, 1317, where we spoke about the difference between the tzaddik gomer and the tzaddik she'ena gomer. So there too, he said there's the weakening of the ra, and then there's the transformation, kemoyas bera. If you look at the paragraph on page 1316, it goes hand in hand with what we're reading right now. So he spoke that Avodas Tzaddikim, even though in general Avodas Tzaddikim is eliminating the personality of the animal soul. Like he says the difference between Tzaddikim and Beinanim. I'm reading from the paragraph, the second paragraph on page 1316. B'kol mokim Tzaddik she'einu gomer hu rak b'bchinas miyut hara. Not that it completely was eliminated. However, it's completely nullified. As he explains there, how the tzaddik gomer is still not like a tzaddik she'ena gomer, is still not like the tzaddik gomer. And he also brings there the Ahava B'Taanugim. So now he's going to continue essentially in the same vein. And it's going to become clear that a tzaddik she'ena gomer in some way is more like the lower level of the sweetening of the gvura, the higher of the lower level of the sweetening of the gvura, and the tzaddik gomer is going to be like the second level that we're going to learn afterwards, which is where the gvura itself has been transformed. So I'm going to read inside and try to finish the paragraph and then take any questions. So he says like this: Ahava Rabba hanal, this great love that's higher than Ahava Selam but lower than Ahava B'Taanugim, yesh lemer, we could say, shezeu madregas tzaddik she'ena gomer. That's the level of the tzaddik that's not the complete tzaddik. So again, there's two levels in a righteous person and a tzaddik. She'ena gomer. Shelamaylam madregas habeinani, which is higher than the beinani, because the beinani has a battle going on all the time. And his animal soul is very active. It's just he's not allowing the animal soul to take the helm, to take control of the wheel of his life. But the animal soul is active all the time. In the tzaddik she'ena gomer, the animal soul has been vanquished. However, it's not been completely transformed. So he says it's higher than madregas habeinu shavedose b'chinas avos al pitam v'das. The beinani is like avos elam. There's avedas al pitam v'das, and that's indeed the reason it's not been the animal soul has not been changed. The tzaddik she'ena gomer u'sheyesh boi gam b'chinas Ahava Rabba. The tzaddik she'ena gomer has, in addition to Ahava Selam, also Ahava Rabba, which is b'chinas Ahava Rabba the re'usa deliba, the great love, which is sometimes associated. Re'usa deliba essentially means the desire of the heart. She'isa shinui be'etzem hachumri hativi, that causes a change in the fundamental personality or the fundamental matter or the coarseness, natural coarseness of the animal soul. And we know who, and this level of the tzaddik she'ena gomer, she'ena tzarich milchama klal. He does not need a war at all. He's not battling the animal soul. The animal soul has already been beaten. Lilchem she'en tzarich milchama klal lilchem imanefesh habamis, to battle and fight with the animal soul. She'ena misava klal shum taina gashmi. Even the tzaddik that's not complete doesn't have any desire for any physical pleasure. And no nonsense and no folly arises in his thought at all. It doesn't say it at all. And no folly arises in the thought, in physical desires. And this is like we said earlier, Shara Eina Pel Mu'umma Canal. This is the level that we spoke about before, that the Ra doesn't have any impact on him. However, so yes, it doesn't have impact. It's completely been neutralized, but he can't say moyes. He does not despise it. It's not like completely despicable to him. So it has no impact on him. So it's like the judge who may agree and completely agree with the chesed, and therefore there's no impact of the din and gvura, but you can't say it's been transformed fundamentally to the level of avos Hashem. That is the level of the tzaddik gomor, Ahava B'Taanugim, which is when it's actually been transformed. The kol zeh, now he sums up all this that we discussed. Hu b'chlal ha'amtoka is all goes into the category of the sweetness sha'adei hizgabrus ribiach due to the dominance and the overpowering element of the abundance of the chsadim, of the kindness that has overpowered the gvura. So we learn now basically two levels in that itself, like the Beinani and like the Tzaddik She'eina Gomer. But even the higher level, you cannot call it a full transformation. You can call it an impact, and more than impact. You can call it a change to the point that it has no effect on him at all, like he said. But it's not been transformed like it is by Tzaddik Gomer, where he completely not only despises the evil, but anything negative has been transformed into complete good. That's why we call him Tzaddik V'Raloi, the Tzaddik She'eina Gomer, because he has Ra, but the Ra is completely kafel for bottle, subjugated and nullified in the presence of this powerful divine soul. But it's not like nullified in the case of the Beini. It's not been nullified. It's just been silenced. It's just been it's being dominated over, being controlled. It would be like having like the war in Ukraine, for example. The enemy is still strong, but even if one is winning, the other one has not been eliminated. By the Tzaddik She'eina Gomer, the battle has been won. However, you haven't transformed the enemy. And in the case of a Beini, what happening? The battle continues, and every day he has to fight it, and he has to win it every battle by battle, and constantly controlling. He has control over the small city called the body, but you can't say that he's eliminated the animal soul, which is the case of the Tzaddik She'eina Gomer. So there's eliminating, and then there's transforming, which is the higher level that we're going to learn about next. It's actual transformation, that the bitter becomes sweet, and the gvura itself is transformed into chesed. So that concludes this paragraph on page 1321. I'll be happy to take any questions. I hope it was clear.
When you say eliminated, you mean diminished. I used the word diminished before.
I don't think we should get stuck in semantics, because there's a whole discussion around here, because I may have used different words in different times. So explain, if you can tell me which one you're talking about, which level, and I can explain. Which level are you referring to?
Oh, the Tzaddik V'Raloi, Tzaddik She'eina Gomer.
Tzaddik She'eina Gomer, what about him? So he used the words. He's no battle at all. He doesn't have any negative desires. But to say he transformed it, like the Tzaddik Gomer, that not. And the details you can read in chapter 10 in Tanya. So it's much higher than the Beinani, but not complete. And this goes hand in hand, if you want to really understand it as well. I'd read chapter 10 and page 1316 and 1317, we elaborated more on the Tzaddik She'eina Gomer. We clearly said that it's a change in the animal soul, but it's not a total transformation of it. Okay, any questions? Any other questions? That means it's all clear? Okay, great. Again, the example I gave, which I think is the most practical, Balabatish one, in Avodah, it needs more explanation, but in a context of battle, as I said, you could be middle of a war, and you could even be winning, but the enemy is quite full strength, and it's a constant battle, like the story of the Beinani. The second level, I'm just summing up what I said. The second is that you've won the war, but you haven't changed the enemy. The enemy is there. They're not showing any resistance. They're not having any effect on your control. But to say that you completely can put your guard down, and there won't be any resurgence, and there won't be any impact from them, you can't say that either. Now, with the Tzaddik Shein Gomer, the truth is you can't use that example because he makes it clear there will not be a resurgence. The thing is, what you could say, however, is that you haven't transformed the animal soul into complete goodness. You've completely eliminated it, but you haven't transformed it. That's the key point. And also the words Moyez Bara, meaning that to say that the Tzaddik Shein Gomer despises evil as well as much as the Tzaddik Gomer, no, that's not the case. In the page 1316, when he spoke about the different ways that Tzaddik Shein Gomer deals with a negative thought, not because, like he said clearly, he never has a deliberate negative thought. But if something falls into his mind, what he'll do is he won't just push it away. He will eliminate. He will win it. He will win it over. But while he's battling, he's going to have some subtle effect on him. That's what he speaks about on page 1317. Even though at the end he wins over that part as well. So that's a little more details in that of Avodah. Okay. So we're going to move to the next paragraph then, since there are no questions. So on page 1321, the new paragraph is going to move now to the second form of sweetening, which does transform the very severities and the very darkness. Omnom, Hamtoka Habeis, this, however, now, by contrast, the second type of sweetening is Shagvura Nepach L'Chesed. The Gvura, the severity, the judgment is transformed to kindness. L'Chesed Mamish. It's transformed Mamish to Chesed. Not just that it agrees, not just that it's silenced, not just that it agrees, not just going along, but it's been transformed to Chesed Mamish. I should read the song of the opening sentence a little differently. Omnom. By contrast, Hamtoka Beisha Gvura Nepach L'Chesed. The second sweetening, where the Gvura is transformed to Chesed Mamish, Hu Kasher B'chinas HaChesed HaMamtik, Hu M'madrega Gavoya Shenivdel Be'erech L'Gamri. This now is due to the fact this happens, this transformation is Kasher, is when Chesed, the one that's doing the sweetening, is from a higher level, that Shenivdel Be'erech L'Gamri. That's completely not commensurate, not proportionate to what we're discussing. Before we learned, if you recall, you go back 2 pages, 1319, just to contrast the language. He said, "V'zeu hefresh bebeis efani hamtoka now, hamtoka aleph hu kasher chsadim be'erech echad im ha'gvura." There, he said the chsadim are commensurate to the gvura, and even its source in Arich Ampin, he said, "Shayich." On the bottom of page 1320, he said, it has some relationship. Now he's saying the second type of sweetening, which is transforming the severity to kindness completely transforming it. This is when the chesed that's doing the sweetening is coming from a level that's completely higher, completely separate and beyond. Like we said, the higher it is, the more power it has to transform. The lower it is, the more it relates to the item, so therefore it can affect it, but it can't transform it. You know, similar to the expression I repeat sometimes from Einstein, I believe he said, you can't change the system from within the system. You can't you can't fix a problem from within the system where the problem was created. So as long as you're dealing on the same level, you could change things, you could impact things, you can elevate them. So now we're talking about a higher level of chesed. Okay. So there's a level called chesed d'kshet. Kshet means emes. So it's considered a level that's higher than regular chesed and even higher than Rav chesed. Rav chesed is the chesed of arich, we said abundance of chesed, to the point that there's no gvura at all. But this is even a higher level. Shubchin is Chesed of Atik. This is the level of Chesed of Atik, not Arich, Atik. Shenetak v'nivdel mekol ha'ishtalshlus. In contrast, Arich Ampin, we know, is called the Sherish, like he said, the root of the emanations. Atik, one of the meanings of Atik means netak. It's disconnected from, it's separate from. Netak means like when you cut away one thing from another. It's like you remove it's removed. So netak nivdal mekol ha'ishtalshlus. It's removed and separate from all of hishtalshlus. That's chesed d'kshet. So this is now a higher level of chesed, and this is the level of chesed that when it is being drawn from, has the power to transform gvura. And I was going to explain it in more detail, meaning breaking down what exactly are the dynamics of this transformation. He says, so what he established is now where it's coming from, the mokim hamtaka. In other words, the sherish hamtaka. Where is the root? What is empowering this level of sweetening? Now we're going to speak about the method of the way it sweetens it. So before we learned the method was like with the water. It either outnumbers it, overrides it, neutralizes it, or even as it has a strong impact and even can change it to some extent. Now he's going to talk about the Eifan Hamtaka, the manner through which the second level of sweetness happens. And what is the manner of the sweetening? What kind of Eifan Hamtaka? It's not due to mixing in more chesed into gvura, viz gabrus, and dominating and overpowering it. Before, it was bringing chesed into the world of gvura, and either outnumbering it or overpowering it and controlling it. Here, it's not in a form of mixing or overpowering. Ella shebeigalis, that when it's revealed, niglas era elyon memela niglas era elyon. Then when it's revealed, this level of chesed, a higher light, a higher form of energy is revealed. So it's not like engaging with the gvura, like let's say a bezdin, they're arguing over innocent or guilty. They're engaging with each other, they're debating the issue, and those that hold that innocent, and they have persuasive arguments, they even can convince the other. But the bottom line, it's an engaging, you're engaging with gvura. You're not bringing in a completely energy from another place. Even though he did say that in order to prevail, you also need a stronger energy, but it's still an energy from Arich Ampin, from Rav Chesed. That's still somewhat commensurate to the discussion. However, they're drawing it into discussion, so Chesed prevails. But it's within the world, like he said, there is the engagement of Chesed and Gvura. There is somewhat of a battle. Even with the Tzaddik Sheina Gomer, it may not be a battle, but it's also not a full transformation, as we learned before. Now you're bringing Er Elyon. Memela nepachadin lechesed v'rachim. This Er Elyon is so powerful that automatically the din, the judgment, the severity gets transformed to kindness and compassion. Ukamoi ba'er pnei melech chayim. The face of the glowing face of the living king. So we mentioned this before. I want to just refer to it before where he mentioned it, where he said, I think it was back there with the Tzaddik Gomer, I believe. Yeah. I believe he brought a Dixie Melech Alakim. Let me see.
How are you translating Chassid Kshot?
I said chesed of emes.
Okay. Yeah. Is that what kshut means?
Kshet means actually to bind. Kshet atzmacha, kshet acherim. But I think it also means emes, if I recall correctly.
No, it does. I'm looking at another reminder by the Alter Rabbi. It's perish chesed shel emes hainu lius emes havaya la'olam vahinu sheyu hagilui lamata kmo l'mayla mamash.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't know if
just trying
that's
to
connected
understand.
to this.
Well, he said chesed shel emes. Trying to understand the word kshut. They said bind, bound, or
Kshet means binding, but I think it also means emes. I'd have to look it up, but I think that's the meaning. Where did he bring Ba'er Pnei Melech Chaim? Anyway, so I gave the example. When you have a situation, let's say you have stories like this, where somebody's being, someone is being prosecuted in court, and there's a court case, and you have a prosecutor and you have a defense, and each one making their case. So you have Chesed and Gvura in battle with each other, each one arguing the point. Now, we know Rosh Hashanah, for example, that's the case. That's Yom Adin. But then comes Be'er Pnei Melech Chaim. You suddenly have the king enters the courtroom. And the glowing face of the king and his compassion can override everything. And everyone sees that no matter what's going to happen here, even if Din has an argument, is the higher Gili now of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim, let's say, of a month of Elul, or during Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that dominates, that causes a whole new Gili. So it's not even that Chesed wins the argument. It's clearly coming from a higher Gili that creates a forgiveness and therefore transformation of Din to Chesed. Like we learned earlier, that's what Shefer accomplishes. So you're going to a higher place that automatically causes a transformation. So like when he said before, Sheresh and Etzolim, or in the Aveda of Ahava Rabba, Ahava Selam, or Ahava Rabba even, at the end of the day, it's a Gili, a higher Gili, so create a change. But transformation, the higher you go, when you get that higher level, when you're on the lower level, you have to engage. And therefore you could win, and Chesed could dominate. But total transformation, he says, is coming from a level that is like Be'er Pnei Melech Chaim.
He brings Or Pnei Melech at the bottom of page 117, 7 lines up from the bottom.
Yeah, correct. The same idea. That's the Ayin Beis. So yeah, bottom of 1317. Thank you. So now he says like this: that when there's the revealing of the Pnei Melech, of the glowing face of the king, but Rav Chesed Atzmi Mamish, with a tremendous amount of fundamental core Chesed, literally, Oz Gama Kateger. Then also the prosecutor, Nasa Saneger, becomes defense, is also transformed. By seeing the desire of the king being one driven toward goodness and kindness, Poshet, seamless, shapeless kindness of the king, and you can see it on the face, on the glowing face, that his face is glowing with kindness and love. Sha'az, in that state, ain't sorech lahamti koyach hadin. You don't need to work on sweetening the power of sweetening the power of judgment. Shalom akatrik, from the prosecutor. Be'eza oris chesed lezakis b'tainis b'taimin klal. Or l'schus, I should say. You don't then need to sweeten and so-called neutralize or dominate or win over the arguments of the prosecutor toward guilt, toward judgment, with any type of Eirach Chesed that is l'schus, or l'zak l'schus probably, b'tainis b'taimim klal, toward merit with arguments and reasoning. You don't need any of that when you're in this state. The ma'achesh sharoya ha'aris pnei melech, because once they see the glowing face of the king, b'raf teva chesed, with this abundance, with this great love and kindness, nepach gam hu l'saneger mamish. He too gets literally transformed to be literally like the defense. That's what's happening here. So it's not do that he's presented a better argument toward merit, which prevailed and won over the prosecutor, but there's something greater happening here, that the prosecutor is completely transformed as well to becoming a defense due to the king, to this great revelation. Ukamay Rosh Hashanah, like it is on Rosh Hashanah, Shu Yom Hadin is the day of judgment. V'yavoyu bnei elikim, like we learned, v'yavoyu bnei elikim. I referred to much earlier yesterday when we spoke about this, the whole discussion that goes back all the way to Rosh Hashanah, which was the whole expression right here. When I spoke about page, what did I say? 12. Here we are. Okay. 12. What did I say? 12. Yesterday I referred to it very directly. Oh, okay. So it's speaking about V'yavei b'nei elikim. B'nei elikim, like he says here, shehein keiches hadinin. Who's the b'nei elikim? Elikim is from the word din. Elikim means din, judgment, gvura. So they are the keiches hadinin. These are the powers of judgment. Lekatrig, to prosecute. V'yavei gam hasoten b'teicham, as we learned earlier, and the soten, who's the ultimate prosecutor. Like he says there and he says here, that the sun comes along with them. The beginning is gvuras kashis, and these are harsh severities, not just regular ones, harsh severities. I just want to find the page because I want to refer to it for a moment. So Havaya Chatem Merivov, okay, right here on page 1287. 1287, the second paragraph, he said, and then he brought a little further, he brings about the Satan at the bottom of the page, I recall. Yeah, Satan b'teicham, Gvuras kashis. So he spoke there about the different levels of Gvura. So back to page 1287. 1287. Yeah. It's very much connected to what we're learning now. Matter of fact, I see on page 1292, he spoke about whether Havaya of Yechat Meriv is Havaya the Zah or higher than that. Ah, okay. Okay, we'll get back to that soon. So anyway, going back here, Ukamoshin is Barliel. Back to the pages I just referred to, 1287. Okay. So on Rosh Hashanah, that's the Yom Hadin. But then something happens. Ach, b're'eis pnei melech, b'rav chesed v'teiv. When they see, or when the judge, the prosecutors, the face of the king, which is glowing with Rav Chesed V'Teiv, with a tremendous amount of kindness and goodness. So And how does this face, what draws the smiling face and the loving face of God? That is drawn down through the Neshamas Yisrael, the souls of Israel, when they blow shofar. Now, when they blow shofar, they access and reach and draw down from the inner core of Erein Sof Baruch Hu. So we're not just dealing with, okay, they did throughout the year, they had their sins and they had their mitzvahs, and they're standing in judgment Rosh Hashanah. But then we have a secret weapon. It's called shofar. Shofar has the ability to pierce the heavens and go all the way to the highest levels, where you can get your Father, God, to smile at us. So when the prosecutors see that, well, let's continue reading before I finish the sentence. Beloved, cherished is the nation, Yedei Sruah, that know the sound. So Chassidus explains what's Yedei Sruah. It should say Teikei Sruah. They blow the sound. They sound the sound of the shofar because they know the secret of the sound. The sound has the ability to go all the way to the highest levels. Hashem ponav yahalechun, like we say in the verses that we say before blowing shofar or after blowing shofar. Ba'er ponav yahalechun, the light of His face, we travel, we go. So the blowing of the shofar is revealing and drawing down the Pnei Melech, the glowing face of the king. So then, when they see that, that's when the prosecutor is sweetened and transformed to be a defense when he sees that. Because there, he has nothing to challenge. It would be like the father is showing compassion to his children, so all the arguments back and forth are basically irrelevant. It's like Hashem says when the Jews left Egypt, even when the prosecutor said, 1 second, how could you take them out of Egypt? They have all kinds of iniquities. And he said, but these are my children. Bonim heim. Ben kach or ben kach, no matter what, they're my children. Even if they're covered in dirt, it's my children. In other words, it's evoking a level that comes from a higher place, like he called the Chesed of Atik, Chesed of Atik, that draws and automatically transforms the prosecutor to defense. Ukamaimer kad ampa de malka nehirin, like the Maimon Zoya that says, when the face of the king is shining, is glowing, kol dinin miskafin misavrin. All judgments are pushed aside. Miskafin means they're subdued, umisavrin, and they're removed. So even though this language could sound similar to what we spoke before, iskafia, that is just subdued or controlled, here clearly he means much more than that. He means it's completely eliminated. Like it says elsewhere, al derech moshel, an example for this. People who are guilty and deserve the death penalty, they've been sentenced with the mechayve miseh. Kishepoigim ba'melech nimcha lehem ha'oven legamri. When they meet the king, where the king has to finally agree. Like even in the United States, you have the concept of clemency that the president can deliver. So when they meet the king, nimcha lehem ha'oven legamri. Even though it's such a severe sin that they deserve death, the death penalty, their sin is completely forgiven. The king didn't go ahead and review the case and say and find merit in them. It's simply because he's the king and is in a benevolent mode or mood or state, and his face is shining. He forgives simply out of his own kindness, not because of review or an appeal. So that's an example brought elsewhere for this idea of how Gvura is transformed. So you see, it's a completely different level of what we've been talking about till now, which is far more engaging with the Gvura, even when it dominates and overpowers and outnumbers and even impacts it. This is called transformation. I'll just stop here. I'll stop here for today. Let me stop for questions. Now he's going to come back, I see, to Meimara, the sweetening of the water in Meimara. Any questions or comments?
The word kshoit, we say it in Vahibin Se'orin. Du el kok kshoit, v'raisa kshoit, univiyei kshoit. So that's what it means, emes.
Yeah. It means emes. I think kshet atzmacha v'achka kshet achem. I think kshet means emes. It's chesed emes. It's an expression, I believe, chesed kshet. When you search for the word chesed kshet, did anything come up?
I believe kshet has two translations. One is emes and one is kshoit atzmacho. Beautify yourself. Like we say, sitolu with a chamor state. It might be wine, it might be a donkey.
Good.
Not binding?
I think it's binding is connected for some reason. I think sheit is, I don't remember. I have to look it up. I remember the topic.
Over here, definitely it's kshoit, like maybe in what we say.
No, for sure. Here, that's why I said emes. That's the first thing I said. Yeah. Yeah, look at the Torah that the Alter Rebbe says, Chesed kshet, hainu chesed shalemes. I think it's a lashon in Zohar, and I think the Rizal, if I recall correctly, teaches chesed that's never nifsek. I'll look it up. I think it's actually Pasha Maseh Tzaddik Gimel Gimel. It's in look at the Torah Maseh Tzaddik Gimel Gimel. I'll look it up afterwards. The level of Chesed the Atik. Yeah, I mean, he did say earlier in the previous page, in the parentheses, Shazel Midas HaEmes. That's higher than Midas Rav Chesed. So I'm thinking that maybe it's connected to that. And that's why I said the parentheses was a little different pshat than the outside of the parentheses. So Midas HaEmes. That's probably the same idea. But here he's referring to it in a transformation. There, he was bringing it to qualify and saying that the Midas Hadin is maskim, but it could be maskim for two reasons. It could agree to the defense due to arguments, or it could agree due to Midas HaEmes, like he's saying here, Chesed Kshet, Be'er Prei Melech Chayim. Okay. Any questions, comments, anything? So we'll stop here at the end of the parentheses, around 2/3 down, page 1321, before the words va'adugma lezeh.